Fixed costs, variable costs, any kind of cost. Every small business owner is looking to reduce. I know we don't always have a ton of buying power. We might not think we're in a position where we can negotiate, but what if there was a way you could meaningfully reduce some of your costs? We're going to talk about that today. Welcome to episode 38 of the Key Hire Small Business Podcast, where we cover the issues that help owners scale their small business. I'm Corey Harlock, creator of Key Hire Solutions, where we grow Texas small business with our talent, and I'll be your host. Today, our guest is Hans Stronck. He is originally from the Netherlands. He will be speaking with an accent throughout our entire interview, just like I will be speaking with a Canadian accent. And he works for the Era Group, and he's a global enterprise partner for them, and they specialize in expense reduction, and we're going to talk about what that is today. He's been with them for 18 years. Prior to that, he spent 15 years in logistics as head of North America. He's lived in more cities in the States than most of us, and most of the people that live in the States. He's been in Dallas, Chicago, LA, North Carolina, Reno, Houston. And a fun fact about Hans, when he was in high school, way back when he was a younger guy, he actually signed a pro soccer contract right out of high school. So Matt, let's bring on Hans. Hans, how are you?
I'm doing well, Corey. Thanks for having me.
How's the soccer career?
The soccer career?
Yeah.
It came to a dead end many years ago.
Hard stop?
Hard stop. Yeah, really hard.
Awesome. Well, today you are an expense reduction expert, and I know we've known each other for a long time, and I've always had an interest in what you do. I think it's going to be an exciting conversation. Would you agree, especially when we talk about the small business owners, $5 to $25 million, they can feel like they don't have much leverage, or they kind of have to pay what they're quoted. They don't. They're kind of in a hard spot with expenses and supplies, things like that.
Well, I know that many of them think that, but I have to say that that's really a myth. So the fact that they think that doesn't mean that it is so, and It doesn't mean that they don't have ways to look at their expenses, reduce their expenses, optimize their costs.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of they go through life. I mean, they're just head down working hard, and they feel like, well, I'm just a small fish. They're not going to budge much, or they ask and they get told, well, no, we can't do that. So they feel like their destiny is to pay retail price, or they don't get the deals that some of the big players get.
Yeah, well, that's wrong thinking, and hopefully today we can sort of put them back on track by giving them some suggestions, some ideas, some case studies that maybe I can come up with that may apply to them, etc. So that's hopefully going to be the goal for today.
Yeah, so let's put a definition around what an expense is. Maybe I know there can be lots of different expenses. I know through our conversations, you've actually kind of said things where I was like, oh, you can negotiate that, or you can get better pricing on that. How does it work? So maybe are there categories you deal with, or categories that we can list out to kind of define what the expenses look like and where they might fall?
Yeah, so and that has nothing to do with the size of the company, right? You have direct expenses, you have indirect expenses. Our organization, Era Group, looks at most expenses. The one thing we do not look at, which happens to be the largest one, is labor, right? But maybe a McKinsey & Company or one of those smart big companies can look at that. Right. We are not going to tell our clients how much they should pay for a secretary or a forklift driver or their VP of finance. So having said that, you have sort of your Pareto, numbers. You have maybe 20% of your vendor base comprises of 80% of your expenses. So I'm sure all the listeners do what we do, and that is look at your pricing, look at your expenses, and try to negotiate and hope for the best, right? Yeah. And by doing that, you naturally start off at the top, the biggest expenses, and you sort of end where time runs out, right? And then the rest is like, well, we hope for the best, and we just don't have time or resources or knowledge to take a look at those. So that's how I see it.
Right.
It's usually very unorganized. There's no systematic approach. There's no philosophy when it comes to cost management or reducing expenses within an organization. And frankly, that is part of the problem. Again, it has nothing to do with the size of the organization. We see it at large ones and we see it at small ones.
It kind of feels like a time and perceived value proposition. I don't have the time for it, and how much could we really save anyway?
And that is true. And I'm here to tell you that you can change it by, if you think it's important, by changing a little bit the philosophy within your organization and make cost optimization sort of an important part of your company's culture and sort of embedded in the culture. Not just you, the CEO, but drill it down to every employee in your company. You always hear people proudly talk about our organization that has a sales culture, right? Or our organization has an engineering culture. I bet you that you've never heard anybody say, and our organization has a cost optimization culture. Well,
right.
Why not, right? Because, if you think of it this way, every extra dollar in revenue that you create, maybe 20% or so will go to your bottom line, right? Every dollar that you cost in expenses, pretty much that entire dollar goes to the bottom line. So why not have a focus on that?
And what are, cumulatively, if you took that seriously, how big is that number in terms of a percentage that you could maybe, and I know everything's different, so we're going to speak in very general terms, but how much could you affect your bottom line? How much more money could you bring to the bottom line, maybe in terms of a percentage?
Yeah, so the only way I can answer that is by looking at our own organization, what we have done for 30 years for our clients. And so the bottom line, the top number is, on average, we save our clients 20%. So, and I can tell you that whatever our organization does for our clients, you, the listener, can do yourself for your organization. Nothing what I'm telling you today requires a PhD or is brain surgery. This is all common sense. It's all strategic. It's all according to a process you put in place. But it's not difficult, but needs to be done. And to answer your question, if you do it, the dollars are significant. 20% of whatever you spend as an organization, minus your labor again, is a lot of money.
For sure, yeah. And it makes me think, especially having a culture of cost reduction, especially if you're in a gain sharing or a net, you share in the net profits or the gains over budget or whatever, the more money there is there, the more that's going to go back to the shareholders of the business or the employees in terms of bonusability. So it's almost in their best interest to try to be reducing costs where possible, or negotiating, or whatever that looks like, to try to be getting the best pricing for their supplies.
Yeah, and for that to happen, again, as a whole organization, it has to start at the top, right? The executives need to be the cheerleaders of this. They need to explain why we're having a cost optimization exercise, let's call it that, or philosophy, or we're going to bring this into our culture. They need to explain why that is, what the benefit of that is to the organization, what the benefit of that is to the individuals, the employees. So it's not just doing a process, it's also sort of a psychological, philosophical component of it, right? Because what you will find is that within your organization, there are a lot of stakeholders who have relationships with vendors. who don't want to change, who like certain products, who don't want to necessarily change that. So if you don't get people on board, if you don't bring them in, if you don't give them accountability and ownership, then they're going to kick back, and your exercise is going to become very, very difficult to be successful.
That's a good point. And what I was thinking of while you were talking was, does the quality need to suffer to get better pricing? Maybe that's kind of what I'm hearing a business owner saying. Yeah, but we pride ourselves on having the best quality, and we don't want to have to use lower quality products.
Right. And the answer is no, obviously, right? I mean, we all can lower cost by reducing quality. That's real easy, right? I mean, we can all do that. But that's not the goal. The goal is to maintain the service levels and the quality, or improve it. And in addition to that, reduce expenses. Now, sometimes that means, okay, there's just not a lot to reduce. That may be the case, but not necessarily. Absolutely not. So, yeah, we hear that too from clients that say, well, that's only going to, suffer our service or our quality, or we already have the best rates in place, or we have a great relationship with our vendor. They would never, do us harm.
Right.
And kind of stuff. So there are all kinds of reasons and why our clients truly believe that they're doing a good job and they are best in class, but the fact is that may not be the case.
And I think that's a perfect segue. You started leaning into the mistakes we make. So as a business owner, if we wanted to put that culture in place, or we think, even if as a business owner, we think, no, my people are doing a good job, and I think, or I believe we're getting fair pricing. What are some of the mistakes a business owner might make, or a department head, or someone who's responsible for this type of thing? What are the mistakes they would make that would limit their ability to be saving costs or reducing costs or maximizing their spend?
Mistake is maybe a hard word, difficult word, but what we see is that they don't do anything, that they just, it's a status quo kind of thing. We've done it for 20 years like this, right? We have managed our freight for 20 years like this. We've had our insurance broker for 15 years. We like him a lot, yada, yada, yada. So a mistake is not the right word, but I think it's a due diligence. You owe it to your organization, and therefore, by extension to your employees, to make sure that you are getting the best buck for you, the best, what's the saying? The best
bang for your buck.
Exactly.
And that sounds
in everything that you buy, that you buy. Worst case scenario is you do your own RFP process, you bring in the competition, you create that tension, and in the end, you stay with the incumbent provider who happens to have the best pricing. So now and you should have done that exercise anyways. We always tell our clients, you should go back to market in everything that you buy at a minimum every 3 years. And in many cases, every year. And after COVID, in certain scenarios, whether it's freight or packaging or other things, every quarter, because it was so volatile.
Right. Yeah, I guess the environment, the economic environment could affect that. But as you were talking in the beginning, it sounded to me, or what I think I heard was, sometimes we have these relationships so long that they become more personal and less business. And we make the assumption that, well, I've been doing business with them for 15 years. Of course, they're giving me the best deal because we're friends.
Yeah.
Or I've been buying it from my buddy's shop, and I'm getting the friends and family discount. And
the most difficult and most painful situations we have in our organization is when we go back to a client who said something like that, and we did the exercise anyway, and we found 43% savings, right? And now suddenly that brother-in-law who is the freight guy at that company, that friendship, disappears.
Right.
It happens. So one of the things I would recommend to the listeners is, one, as I've said, do the due diligence, but take the relationship manager away from the negotiation part, right?
Right.
So the guy who deals with the freight guy every day, let not have him do the negotiations, but somebody else within the organization, so that the relationship stays the same between the two, and it becomes a little bit more a neutral kind of a exercise, if that makes
Right.
sense.
And then that person can go back and throw you or me under the bus and say, well, they did it. I told them not to, but they
Right.
wanted to do it. But 43% savings could buy you a lot of friendships. You know what I mean? Like 43.
And can ruin a lot of them too.
That's
Yeah,
what I mean. Like
if they found out, exactly.
and
Yeah.
and I don't know that they're doing it because they're gouging you. It's just that's what their margin is, because maybe they're a small player too, and they can't give you the service levels at a reduced price because their operating costs are high. I always like to assume people aren't being nefarious, right? I always want to assume people are being honest and doing a good job. I understand they need to make money, but at 43%, once your business is up and going and you're finding ways to cut costs, that's meaningful. Like that's, especially if that's your freight company and everything you produce goes out on freight, and you can save 43% on freight, that's real money.
It adds up quick. Yes. Yeah.
What other mistakes come to the top of your head here, Hans, that people are making when they're kind of think they're trying to save money or trying to implement a program like you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I would step back and sort of look more like the strategic answer there. If somebody does implement a cost optimization exercise or philosophy within the organization, what I see is it's sort of an ad hoc kind of approach. Let's cut 3% across every expense, or let's freeze all our expenses for 2025, right? It's sort of like going on a diet on January 1, and 3 months later you're 5 pounds heavier than you were in December, right? So there's no long-term philosophy, no long-term process. And so it's more like the shiny object of the month kind of a thing. So that's never going to work. And so again, I come back to, if this is important to you, and I'm telling you, you can do it. I'm telling you, this is not difficult or complicated. It has to come from the top. It has to be ongoing and sustained. It has to be measured, whatever you're doing. It has to be explained to the field, to people in the field. But the most important part is that you have to do whatever you implement, that process, you have to do that on an ongoing basis, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, it's just ad hoc, and it's just, it's not going to have a long-term impact.
So you have one department who's just trying to grind every supplier, one department who's not taking it seriously, another department who renegotiates one contract and says, we got to win, I did my part, and everyone's kind of taking it differently, maybe different levels of how serious they are about it. And
because the top management hasn't really told them how they see this, and there's no ownership, there's no accountability. We see it all the time with companies that have many facilities or many stores or many warehouses. Everybody at each facility just buys whatever they feel like buying. There's no rhyme or reason to it. So they should consolidate. They should do a lot of different things to sort of make it much better for the whole organization.
What's your philosophy on having, your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers? Great. Obviously, you've graded them, so you know who's doing it, but kind of not giving all of your business to the tier A, giving them maybe 70%, your tier B gets 20%, your tier C gets 10%, just to keep them active. So if something were to ever happen, you're not calling them up and saying, I know I haven't ordered anything from you in 18 months, but now I need you to save me, right? But I mean, maybe those ratios are a little different, but I know some companies kind of have a bit of a mix in there just in case. Also, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and that obviously happened during COVID, right? You remember that certain supplies and certain freight lanes became very, very scarce, and so if you only shipped UPS and you knocked on FedEx's door because you needed them, they would say no at that time, right? For that reason, just what you're saying. So for that reason, I would say, yeah, it's not a bad idea. Generally speaking, I would say I'm all in favor of consolidating to the fewest vendor as possible. That doesn't mean one, but if it used to be 18 packaging companies, maybe 3 is plenty enough, kind of thing. So that would be sort of my answer to it. Generally speaking, consolidating vendors is a good thing.
Okay, so
not just to negotiate, but also if you look at it, the invoice processing, sort of the back office kind of work that you have to do. It just reduces expenses when you reduce your vendor base. Okay.
And so, but you're saying, would you ever advise saying just go with the best one?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay. Would that depend on what that supply particular thing is?
Exactly. Yeah. And if it's some sort of pharmaceutical related supplies, I may say don't do that. It's a little too risky. But if it's waste management or packaging or uniforms or something pretty mundane, I would say doesn't matter. Go for it. Do one.
Okay.
Do one. And so you leverage your expenses and you leverage, obviously your ability to negotiate.
Awesome. That's good. So thank you for that, Hans. What's and is any other kind of missteps or mistakes or things you've seen that you wouldn't advise jump to your head after everything we've talked about?
I would say, don't see your vendors as an enemy or somebody that is against you or you should be against them. Have open discussions with them. Their model allows them, first of all, to be flexible in what kind of contracts they give to you. Many of the things in their contracts are negotiable. Many of them, to them, are more profitable than other items. So for you to understand that allows you to be able to negotiate. You should understand, how can I, as your client, Mr. UPS, make you more profitable, by doing what? And the UPS guy may say, well, you want us to be at your office every Monday at 8 a.m. If we could pick it up at 4 p.m. for these following reasons, that would make a big difference to us, right? Well, now suddenly you have a tool to negotiate with them. So try to understand what makes them tick, and as part of your negotiation process with them.
That's interesting. And would that include kind of maybe bundling, giving them a more obscure service line, even if, let's say, I have service line or I need service A from, we'll use FedEx, and I'm going to give them tons of business here. And then there's this other little service I need over here that I can get for $1 from another person, but FedEx is going to cost me $1.10.
Mm-hmm.
But it represents 5 or 10% of the whole package.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, I'm still going to save money. Would that help me get me leverage to say, look, I'll throw in an extra service line here for you. Now let's talk about the overall package and negotiate that.
And that's part of the consolidation of vendors thing I was talking about.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
So suddenly, if I give you, Mr. FedEx, the business I'm doing with UPS, then suddenly that increases your business by 20%. What's that worth to you? But you can also go to UPS and say, hey, UPS, currently I'm shipping 80% with FedEx. And that's how you keep them honest, right? And that's what you do through an RFP process. You bring in either the smaller vendors that you already deal with or totally new vendors, and you create that competitive tension. Again, not with the with the desired outcome to lower quality and service levels, but to bring the rates to where they should have been in the first place. And so when we write an RFP for our clients, a request for proposal for our clients, and I suggest your people do that too. Part of it obviously is related to the cost, but equally important is the service requirements that you demand at a minimum and the quality requirements that you demand at a minimum. So everybody understands what they're pricing and what your needs are. So it's going to be apples to apples.
And it probably doesn't hurt when you're asking your FedEx guy for his best quote to say, oh, by the way, I have another quote coming in from your competitor.
100%.
So they're not going to start high and negotiate. They're going to start with best price, hopefully.
Yep. That's the
okay.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's good information.
But again, don't see them as adversaries, right?
Yeah, and I hear that all the time.
Try to understand their business model and see how you can help them make more money in order for you to, negotiate a better deal yourself.
I think that's the key thing you said is it can't be a what's in it for me, help me. If you are one of the few clients that are actually talking to them as hey, we're partners in this, how can we help each other?
Yeah.
You might get a little extra, or if they say we're in a bind, I only have one truck and I got two people calling for it, they might send it to your shop versus the person who's a pain in their ass, right?
Yeah. So now you have a great relationship that you're building with FedEx, but don't make the mistake to not bid it out again 1 or 2 or 3 years later, right? Just because they are so nice. Do not do that.
Yeah, don't fall into the buddy trap.
Nope.
And of course, we're using FedEx as an example, but that's not all you do or all anyone should be negotiating.
We do 50, 60, 70 different cost categories.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the point where we give some people advice, and then remind me, I have a question for you that's very timely after we give the advice. So other than calling you, Mr. Stronck, what are the kind of 2, 3, 5 pieces of advice you'd give a business owner that they could take back to their business today and say, hey, I want to start getting a little more focused on cost savings. How can they get rolling with it? What are some baby steps they could take to dip their toe in the water and see how it works?
Yeah. So we talked about, creating the philosophy and the culture and all that. So that's important. What they can do literally today, what they should be doing is ask their accounting or finance department for let's call it an AP vendor file or a general ledger for the last 12 months, right? And take a look at the vendors that are on that list, how much you spend with those vendors, then start to put them in buckets. The waste management bucket, the insurance bucket, the telecommunication bucket, right? And we do that for our clients. And I'm telling you, 100% of the time, whoever sits there, executive in front of us, there are certain things where he says, I cannot believe we're spending that much money on that category. I cannot believe we have 17 vendors for packaging. I never knew, blah, 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 right? So now suddenly you yourself, by just looking at the data that you have, that somebody can give you within 30 minutes, you now have a real good understanding of, one, where you spend the money and what cost categories, who you spend it with, and how much, right? So I would start with exactly that. So now you sort of go to what you earlier called like a tier 1, 2, 3 kind of, let's call it expense categories. And I would obviously start with the big fish, and if IT is a big fish in your spending within your organization, then I would then sort of create a exercise that will lead to an RFP process that will lead to responses to that RFP, where you now bring in some new vendors, some incumbent vendors, and likely better pricing. And
Right.
I would do it just with one or two categories to start off with, not all of them, obviously. But create a process, right? Get the AP file, create your baseline. Your baseline says, this is what I'm doing in IT today. That is part of what you send in your RFP, because that is what's going to be priced. You write the RFP, you send it to your incumbent vendors and some competition. You manage that process. It comes back. Now you got back 8 responses. You pick the two top ones. One is an incumbent, the other one is not. You implement it, right? You implement now your new rates. And I would say at that point, the most important part comes at this stage. You implement it, and then you will continue to audit that process, that expense on a monthly basis, ongoing. Because what we see is that, okay, now we have implemented it and we'll leave it alone. So over time, different prices leak in. Over time, different vendors leak in, et cetera, et cetera. And so you need to continue to audit on a monthly basis what is being done in that specific cost category, for all the reasons you can imagine. Make sure that we buy the right stuff at the right price from the right vendor.
And that could be part of your quarterly management meeting, leadership meeting, just to say we're going to add that review in there.
Yeah. So that's what we do for our clients, big and small. And none of what I just told you cannot be done by anybody listening.
Right. Yeah. No. And it makes perfect sense. So I think that's really cool. Kind of getting that. So to say back what I think I heard you say was, get the report, the categories that kind of shock you and think, oh my God, how much money are we spending there? Put an RFP proposal together, go out, get 2 or 3 companies, let them all know that you're getting RFPs, so they'll give you a best price. Pick one, go with it, monitor.
Yeah. And have somebody within your organization manage all the contracts of the vendors, because we see that all the time too, that there's no management of contracts. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows when they expire. In a lot of these categories, they auto-renew. It is very, very costly. So make sure that you have somebody responsible to manage the contracts.
Good point.
It's sort of an aside, but it's an important aside.
It's super important.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great, Hans. So here's the timely question I have for you.
Okay.
Tariffs.
We
have potentially some large tariffs being put out there, and I have some clients that are talking about
with Canada, I hear.
Well, yeah, it's sent shockwaves all over the place, but trying to stay away from the politics of it, but thinking of the cost saving side of it. I have some clients now that are talking about gathering all their cash on hand and putting in some big orders now to land some product before potential tariffs. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, if you buy a ton of stuff from Mexico or from China or from Canada, that would not be a bad idea, because I must say, I think the tariffs are coming. I studied economics, so I guess I'm an economist by trade. And few economists would say that tariffs are a good thing for the global economy. Most economists are saying Trump is using it as a sort of a hammer, right? More than an economic tool, more than that he believes that tariffs are good. So right. I think they're going to happen. I think they will be temporary. But temporary can be a long time if you buy a ton of stuff from Mexico and suddenly, come March it's going to be 25% more expensive. So yeah, probably not a bad idea to buy some extra stuff in the next coming weeks.
So you think if someone got a 3-month, 6-month supply of something, they might be able to skirt around the tariff?
Well, I don't know that, but I probably, if I were the owner of a company that buys a lot of stuff from those countries, I would likely do that. Normally, I would say no. A lot of inventory is not good. That's just this money sitting in your warehouse or in your facility. That's not good normally, right? But I tend to believe that this is what's going to happen in January or February, unless some of these countries make some changes. So therefore, I would probably do exactly that, even though as an economist, I would say it makes not a lot of business sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. That's good info. Thanks, Hans. That wasn't on the script.
You're putting me on the spot there.
Not that we have a script, but I was, as you were talking, I thought, tariffs are a hot topic right now, and I wanted to get your expertise. I appreciate that. Yeah, awesome. So Hans, if people like what they have to say and they want to learn more about the ERA Group and what you guys can do with them or pick your brain, how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, I would say contact me direct. Well, you can go to our website, eragroup.com, obviously, and there's like gazillion case studies, I'm sure, and other things. Call me, and I'll be more than happy to give you advice, walk you through your specific scenario. That's part of what we do, right? So by all means, contact me via my email if you wish.
Awesome. And do we have his email, Matt? If not, we'll drop it in the liner notes if I'm putting Matt on the spot again. But if we don't have it, we'll drop it on the liner notes. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks, Hans. Been great catching up. There it is. He's fast. Yeah, so this has been great. And we'll have to catch up and grab lunch again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for letting me do this, Corey.
It's super valuable. I mean, any way we can help people be more profitable and more sustainable in their business, and cost savings it's not a top of mind thing. Everyone always complains about cost, but I think a lot of business owners feel like it's just their fate. And this is what costs are. And we don't have the leverage. Who's going to give us a better deal? We're not a big player, and there's a lot of misnomers out there. And I think you did a great job at clarifying that and saying, well, hold on, there are some things you can look at. And sometimes it's just diligence and just going through a bit of a process and starting to knock those down. I mean, the fact that you said across the board, you could bring 22% more to the bottom line in terms of costs without labor. Yeah. You know, you're in a manufacturing facility or a wholesaling facility or something, that's meaningful dollars.
It's real dollars. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, people just don't talk about it much, but they should. Every dollar you save goes straight to your bottom line. I mean, how nice is that?
For sure. I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate your time. It's been great.
Yeah, okay, Corey. Hey, thanks again for doing it, and we'll stay in touch.
All right. Thanks, Hans. There you go, Hans Stronck. Great guy. Really enjoy speaking with him. And like I said, he's a friend outside the show as well. And I think we're really lucky to have him come on and chat today and share some knowledge with us. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the Key Hire Small Business Podcast. If you got value out of today's episode and want to keep up to date on our new content, make sure you leave a comment. Let us know what you think of the episode. You could recommend topics for us. We always like that. Things you guys want to hear and want information on. And let us know what you think of the episode. So don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, or whatever your favorite platform is by searching up the Key Hire Small Business Podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Corey Harlock. And until next time, stop grinding, start growing.